This lecture is going to cover the anatomy of the heart. Now, the heart is part of the cardiovascular system, along with your blood vessels and the blood. Now, the heart's role is to create pressure. When it contracts, when the muscle in the heart contracts, it'll create pressures to be able to move the blood and pump it out through the blood vessels. The blood vessels will be carrying the blood, and the blood's going to be containing various substances like your gases and your glucose and hormones and waste products. So we're going to kind of look at the structure of the heart, such it's like a central part of the cardiovascular system. We'll start with the gross anatomy of it. Now, location-wise, the heart is located within the mediastinum, and the mediastinum is this general region right in here, and it's located in the pericardial cavity. In AMP1, you should have learned about body cavities, and the pericardial cavity is an example of a ventral body cavity. The pleural cavities, which house the lungs, is also a ventral body cavity, as well as the peritoneal cavity, which houses organs of the abdominal pelvic region. That cavity itself has fluid, referred to as serous fluid, which one of its functions is to help with lubrication. And since, think about, the heart contracts and beats all the time, that there would be a lot of wear and tear, so it's there to kind of lubricate it and keep it from kind of becoming abraded. The heart in the chest wall, we're going to give you a couple little terminologies about the heart. The apex of the heart is right down, let's do that in blue. This is the apex of the heart. This is the base of the heart. The apex of the heart is located between, depending on the individual, between the fourth or fifth intercostal space, and the spaces between the ribs. It's fourth, fifth intercostal space. It's left of the sternum, mid-clavicular line. So I want to write, actually it's in your notes, so I want to write it down. But the apical pulse is if a person needs to listen for the apical pulse, that's actually the placement of the stethoscope to listen to apical pulses, is they go over that region which I had mentioned. It happens to also be the auscultatory site for the mitral valve. The base of the heart is located up at the second lines up with the second intercostal spaces. And just as an aside, is the second intercostal space to the right of the sternum, second intercostal space to the left of the sternum happen to be auscultatory sites to listen to your pulmonic and aortic valves. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in lecture or lab. The heart has what we refer to as a pericardial sac associated with it. And the pericardial sac includes serous pericardium as well as a fibrous pericardium. The fibrous pericardium is a very tough, fibrous. It's composed of connective tissues that are dense and tough, that provides, one of the things they do is it prevents overstretching the heart, but it also anchors the heart to the surrounding walls. It prevents, also I had mentioned before, it helps prevent the heart from overfilling. Now, the serous pericardium has two components to it. So the serous pericardium is a serous membrane. It includes the visceral pericardium and the parietal pericardium. On this picture here, I'll do it in red. The visceral pericardium is going to be covering the heart itself. The parietal pericardium is going to be, it's actually continuous or fused to the fibrous pericardium. It's inseparable from it, but it's going to be like right here. And it's hard to see here, but it's going to be lining the cavity in which the heart is found. So it lines the pericardial cavity. So remember, the serous membranes are double layers. They have the parietal layer and a visceral layer. The parietal layer covers the cavity. The visceral layer covers the organ. Now, if we look at these membranes histologically, is the parietal pericardium, which you see up here, is fused to this, I'm just going to cover it out. There's the fibrous pericardium. It's fused and inseparable from it. But the parietal pericardium has two tissues associated with it. So in AMP1, you learned about these serous membranes. They have an epithelial tissue and a connective tissue. The connective tissue is areolar tissue. The epithelium, which just says epithelium here, but it has a specific name. The epithelium is referred to as mesothelium. If you look at the picture, they look like fish scales. And so if you look at it, it's one layer of flattened cells, which they're pretty much simple squamous epithelium, but we give it a special name. We call it mesothelium. That mesothelium is also the epithelium that's associated with the visceral pericardium. So this here would also be mesothelium, and the connective tissue associated with the visceral pericardium is also areolar tissue. So you'll see between the two layers is the actual pericardial cavity, which contains that serous fluid. So the serous fluid provides lubrication and somewhat protection too. On this picture also I want to bring your attention to is the layers, or the sections of the heart. The heart, and I'm going to erase some stuff so we can see things a little bit better again. We're going to look at 3 layers of the heart. The first layer that I'm going to start with is the outermost layer is called the epicardium. You'll notice the epicardium is also referred to as the visceral pericardium. So the epicardium is that mesothelium with the areolar tissue. Next layer, which is the thickest layer, is the myocardium. Myocardium, let's erase that so you can see it. The myocardium is comprised of mostly cardiac muscle tissue, but there are some connective tissues that are found within that myocardium. Things like elastic tissue, which provides that ability of the heart to go back to its original position after it's been stretched. It has some other connective tissues associated with it also. The innermost layer, the layer that's going to be next to where the chambers of the heart are going to be, where it's going to be filled with blood, is referred to as the endocardium. So the endocardium has some areolar tissue, and what you see for the epithelial tissue associated with endocardium is referred to as endothelium. Now the endothelium is simple squamous epithelium. We just give it a special name. Now endothelium is specifically located lining the chambers of the heart, blood vessels, and lymphatic vessels. Now we're going to look at the chambers of the heart. Actually, before I look at the chambers of the heart, I do want to remind you about some of the characteristics of cardiac muscle. Now, cardiac muscle is an involuntary muscle. It's striated. It has these intercalated discs. Now, the intercalated discs are comprised up of gap junctions and desmosomes. So the gap junctions are actually ion channels that allow ions to move very quickly from cell to cell, because we want the muscle, cardiac muscle, to act as referred to as a functional syncytium, to kind of act as a unit, act as one. It's going to allow it to be more efficient. The desmosomes are structural. They maintain integrity, so it keeps the cells from being pulled apart. So now let's go look at the chambers of the heart. We're going to start with the uppermost chambers. Collectively, or plural, is atria. Singular would be atrium. So we're going to look at this chamber here and this chamber here. This one is the right atrium. I'm just going to abbreviate. This one is the left atrium. We are in anatomical position, so you're looking at a subject. So this would be the subject's right over here. This would be their left. So the atrium are thin-walled chambers. Their job is, one of their jobs is they act as storage reservoirs. When the valves, these are AV valves right here and here, when these are closed, blood is coming back to the heart and it has to hold it. So they kind of fill with blood. The right atrium, which you see over here, receives blood from the superior vena cava, which is this blue vessel here. I'm just abbreviating it. And the inferior vena cava. So these are large veins that are draining blood from different areas in your body, and it's emptying back into the right atrium. Over here, this is the left atrium. So the left atrium right there is receiving blood from the pulmonary, which you're seeing right here, from pulmonary veins. So the right atrium receives blood from the superior and inferior vena cava. You can pronounce it cava, depends on what part of the country you're from. The left atrium receives blood from the lungs. So the right atrium is receiving deoxygenated blood. The left atrium is receiving predominantly oxygenated blood because it's coming back from the lungs. Now the atria also act as referred to as primer pumps. When they can contract, and when they contract, they're going to top off the blood that's in the ventricles. Now, I do have to mention, most of the blood that enters the ventricles empties or goes into it passively. Once these valves are open, because these got all filled up right over here, the blood is going to just dump into the ventricles. Think of it like a dam. You got all this water behind a dam, and you open up the dam. What's going to happen? The water's going to go from a higher pressure to a lower pressure. So most of the blood enters the ventricles passively, but the atria will contract and top off the ventricles. Now, this picture kind of shows you kind of the arrangement of the muscle fibers that you have in the atria. So one of this top picture, you see these muscle fibers, which are more superficial fibers, kind of acts as they're like a lariat, and it's encircling both atria. When they contract, they're going to kind of moving the muscle this direction. You also have these deeper atrial fibers, which are independent for each chamber. When they contract, they're going to move blood this way. So when the atria do contract, it's going to propel blood towards the opening of the atrioventricular valves and then into the ventricles. Now this structure right here, the venous fibrosis of the heart, we'll be talking about when we discuss the valves a little bit more in depth. Now there's some other structures that are associated with the atria that we need to talk about. You see one right here. That one's the easiest, and a little one right here. This here is the left auricle of the heart, and there's a reason why I'm writing this out. This one would be the right, I'm just going to write right, but it's the right auricle of the heart. The auricles themselves, the auricles of the heart. So the auricles of the heart, I'm just going to draw a picture of a heart. The auricles of the heart are named because they resemble an ear. The auricles, you should have learned about the structure of the ear. The outer ear, the pinna, is also referred as the auricle. So they were named because they resembled the ear. Now the reason why I wrote out left auricle of the heart and right auricle of the heart is you got to know your rights and lefts. Actually, oops, I just made a huge mistake, so we're going to fix this right now. This one is the right. I think I was looking at it. This one is the left. That's the right auricle, so I had switched it. But you got to know your rights and lefts. Now the auricle of the heart. If I just said right auricle, I could be talking about your external ear on your right. So it's important to say right auricle of the heart or left auricle of the heart. So that's why I wanted to mention that. Now they're kind of just like little flap-like things that are found on the on the outer edges of the overlying those atria. Now, some other things that are going to be associated with the heart, we're going to have to section through so you can see it a little bit better, is this picture I don't like very well because it doesn't show it. Now, if you look at, just kind of look here where they section along the little edges of the wall, you'll see kind of little bumps, but I'm going to show you a better picture. These are going to be referred to as pectinate muscles. They were named because they resembled the teeth of a comb. And I'm going to show you how it looks, why they resemble teeth of a comb. So here you see you're looking at the heart kind of from above, and they have opened up the right atrium, and you see these pectinate muscles right in here, okay? What they do is they allow the muscle to have a lot more power of contraction. It doesn't need to be a huge amount of power for blood to get from the atria to the ventricle, but it does help to increase power of contraction without necessarily having a lot more muscle mass. Now, in general, the atria, the muscle mass is a lot smaller than when we look at the ventricles. Now, one thing though is those pectinate muscles are more prominent in the right atrium. If we looked at the left atrium, they're not as predominant. You won't see them as well. Now, another structure that I'm going to talk about, since it does show it here, and I'll show you another picture, is associated that you can see if you look into the right atria, is what you see right here. This is a depression that you would see in an adult that you notice in the right atria, and it's referred to as the fossa ovalis. Fossa referring to that it's a depression. Ovalis refers to being oval shaped. So the fossa ovalis is observed as a depression in the right atrium. Now, it's a remnant of the fetal foramen ovale. Foramen was an opening that was between the right atria and the left atria and allowed blood to go from the right atrium to left atrium and bypass the lungs. You didn't need a lot of blood flow to lungs during fetal development, but after you were born, that should close, and so you have this small depression. If that does not close, they refer to as a patent foramen ovale. I have a patent foramen ovale. Mine never closed. If you're interested to know the problems the problems that could be associated with it, you can ask me at any time. Now, the next thing I want to look at is the lower chambers of the heart. The lower chambers of the heart are referred to as the ventricles. This one right here is the right ventricle. This right here would be the left ventricle. So the ventricles are thicker walled chambers, and their job is to create pressures to get blood to certain locations. So the right ventricle, which you see right here, we'll just do it in green. I'm just going to exit in green. It will generate pressures to get blood up into the lungs. So it's going to go out through, referred to as the pulmonary trunk, which is right here. The left ventricle, which you see over here, is going to pump blood out through and into the aorta, which you see right in here, into the aorta. Now, structurally, there's some differences between them. So just on this picture, what you're going to notice is there's a difference in thickness. Now, what I remember is I want to mention this right here. This is referred to as the interventricular septum. So separates the two ventricles. The interatrial septum, which you can't see on this picture, separates the left atrium and the right atrium. Now, some people actually are born with holes in the septum, and it can cause a shunting of blood. My daughter was born with a hole in her interventricular septum, but luckily within a couple years after she was born, it did close. Now here, this picture kind of illustrates the differences in the shape and the thickness of the walls of the ventricles. The right ventricle has a crescent shape to it. So it has a little crescent shape associated with it. It's much thinner. The left ventricle is more conical shaped, and the wall is a lot thicker. Now this picture right here shows the muscle relaxed. This one over here, the muscle's contracted. So you can kind of see what happens when the muscle contracts. The reason why the left ventricle is much thicker is that it has to generate more power. It has to generate more force because it has to create higher pressures to open up the aortic semilunar valve and get blood out to the systemic circulation. The systemic circulation is a higher pressure, higher resistance circulation. So it has to work harder. Also, the conical shape is a mathematical thing. And I'm good in math, but not that great in math. But geometrically speaking, that shape, that conical shape, allows it to generate more power. Now, the right ventricle doesn't have to generate as much pressure because the pressures in the pulmonary circulation and the resistance in the pulmonary circulation is much less. Now, both ventricles pump identical volumes of blood. That's an important thing to remember. They pump identical volumes of blood, but the left ventricle has to work harder than the right ventricle to do their job. So the right ventricle only needs to get blood up to the lungs. It's not that far away. Pressures aren't that high. Resistance isn't that high. But left ventricle has a much farther distance to travel, and it has to do it against higher resistance and higher pressures that you have in the systemic circulation. Now, some structures associated with the ventricles that I want to bring your attention to is the first. If you kind of look at, kind of reminds me of an English muffin. You got all the nooks and crannies. You see them, all of them, like right in here. Just kind of drawing them in. All these little ridges that you see. Those are referred to as the trabecula carnii. So trabecula, I should say trabeculi because it's plural. Carnii. Trabecula means brace. Carn means kind of meat. Like chili con carne. The advantage of having these nooks and crannies is if the inside of the wall of the heart was smooth, it would create a suctioning effect, which decreased the pumping effectiveness of the heart. So having those kind of ridges in there is going to allow it to be a little bit more efficient. Now, another structure that I want to bring to your attention is it's easier to see in some of if we get a heart from an animal to find it, any of the models in lab do not show it. So you won't really see any of the structure in any of the lab models, but you should understand what it does. Now, I believe on this, it's supposed to be like right here, but don't quote me. But the structure that I want to talk about is called the Moderator Band. Now, this structure, the Moderator Band, is only located in the right ventricle. One of the things it does aid in overexpansion of the heart, but it also carries an electrical impulse from one of the smaller branches of the right bundle branch. So when we talk about the cardiac conduction system, you're going to see what the right bundle branch does. Well, I might as well mention to you the right bundle branch is part of the cardiac conduction system that's going to allow the right muscle or the right ventricle to be able to depolarize and eventually contract. So the moderator band is going to aid in kind of carrying an electrical impulse from one of the branches of of the right bundle branch. It also, people who are interested in doing any kind of echocardiography, is the Moderator Band is often used as a landmark, anatomical landmark. So it helps them distinguish that that is specifically a right ventricle, because you would not see that in the left ventricle, especially if there's something been going on and there have been some structural changes in the heart. The Moderator Band is going to tell that person that that's the right ventricle. Now, the last structure I want to talk about associated with the ventricles at this point is referred, I'm going to erase so I can have room, is referred to as the infundibulum of the heart. So infundibulum of the heart, and there's a reason why I'm writing of the heart again. It's called the infundibulum of the heart, or it's also referred to as the conus arteriosus. So Arteriosus. It's referred to as the infundibulum of the heart because it's funnel shaped. Infundibulum is a word referred to as a funnel shaped cavity or an organ, and this is kind of funnel shaped. This is the infundibulum of the heart, or the conus arteriosus, is a major outflow tract of the right ventricle, and it's right there. Okay, so it kind of funnels it. Now, the reason again why I said infundibulum of the heart is because you've already should have learned about the infundibulum of other structures when we talked about the female reproductive tract. So remember the infundibulum of the fallopian tube. Now, what I also want to do is these going to be associated with the heart are the valves. And so some of the pictures, like here, there's some other things that you saw in this picture that I didn't mention, but I'm going to kind of tie them in with the valves. So we're going to look at the valves of the heart. Now, the valves of the heart, overall, their function is to prevent backflow of blood. We want to do, I'm just going to briefly go over kind of the order in which blood moves as we go through the heart. Is blood's going to go into the right atrium, down to the left or right ventricle, out through the pulmonary trunk, and then up to the lungs, okay? Where it's going to become oxygenated to get rid of carbon dioxide. Then the oxygenated blood's going to come back in. It's going to come in from the other side too, but you don't see it. Come back in, empty into the left atria, down to the left ventricle, up and out the aorta, and then to the rest of the body. Now, when the blood moves through the heart, you have these valves. So the valves, if they're closed, they don't allow blood to move. If they're open, blood's going to go through them. So the first valves I'm going to look at are the Atrioventricular Valves, or the AV valves. The Atrioventricular Valves include this one over here. This is the tricuspid, because it has 3 cusps. This one over here is the mitral valve. The tricuspid valve is going to determine whether or not blood is going to go from the right atria to the right ventricle. If it's closed, there's not going to be any blood moving across. If it's open, blood will move from the right atria to the right ventricle. Well, it's going to be important that it closes at a certain point in time, because when the ventricles are contracting, that you don't want the blood to go back up into the atria, because the whole thing is we want to get the atria, or the blood from the atria into the ventricles. I want to then get the blood out through these major vessels, and I don't want it going backwards. So it prevents these 2 valves, prevents the backflow of blood from the ventricle back into the atria. Tricuspid will prevent backflow of blood from the right ventricle into the right atria. The mitral valve would prevent backflow, I can't even say it, backflow of blood from the left ventricle to the left atria. Now the aortic, right here, this is picture. Here's another picture kind of showing you the valves. So we're looking at a superior view of the heart, and they did a transverse section. And so you see the valves, the AV valves, you see it right here and right here. These 2 are semilunar valves. Now, over here, they did a frontal section. You can see the left atria. So if that valve is open, blood's going to go into the ventricle. And then if we look here, when that muscle is contracting, you want blood to come out here. You don't want it going back here. So it's going to prevent that backflow of blood. Okay? Now the semilunar valves, actually before I do that, let's do this. Let's go back to this picture. Now the AV valves are big, floppy, and sloppy valves. They have a hard time staying closed. And so we have a couple things associated with the AV valves that you need to be aware of. These little strings that you see right in here and right in here. So the little cord-like, tendon-like strings are referred to as the Corti Tendoni. So let's write that out. Corti So these are attached to the AV valves. Well, what they are then, they're attached to the AV valves, but they're also then attached to these muscles that you see. Let's see what we can do. You see the muscle right there, and right there, and right there. They're attached to what are referred to as papillary muscles. So papillary muscles, when they contract, they're going to pull on those AV valves and keep those flaps from going back up into the atria, and they're also going to keep them closed. So they want to keep them, so when let's go back here so you can see it. So they will pull to keep these guys closed. So they're going to pull it like here, okay, to allow it to stay closed. There are instances of when people have had heart attacks, and if it involves the papillary muscles, what can result, or if there's damage to the papillary muscles, they can end up having where the valves don't close, and it leads to valvular defects referred to as, it would be either, if it would involve the mitral valve, they refer to as mitral regurgitation. If it involved the tricuspid valve, they refer to as tricuspid regurgitation. So that sometimes happens. Now these semilunar valves, which you see right here in the superficial view, is going to go here, is the semilunar valves include the pulmonic semilunar valve, I'm going to abbreviate SL, and we have an aortic semilunar valve. The pulmonic valve you can see very easily in this picture. The pulmonic semilunar valve is right here. This prevents blood from going back into the right ventricle after it's come into the pulmonary trunk. If that valve's closed, nothing's going to pass through it. So we do want it open when we want blood to go out here, but when we're done, we need to close it. So we have the pulmonic semilunar valve. The aortic semilunar valve you can't really see on this. You'd have to turn, look up inside. On the lab models, you'll have to kind of look down and look up, and you'll see the aortic semilunar valve. So that's between the aorta and in the left ventricle, and it prevents the backflow of blood from the aorta back into the left ventricle. Now the semilunar valves are a little neater. They were designed a little bit better, so they don't need any corti tendoni or papillary muscles associated. They close right, nice and easy. Now some connective tissues. I do want to talk a little bit about some connective tissues associated with the heart and the fibrous skeleton, specifically this thing called the skeleton of the heart, which is referred to as the annulus fibrosus of the heart. Now there are a lot of connective tissues associated with the heart. I already mentioned about elastic tissue, so that provides the elasticity to the heart. So when it fills up with blood, and then when it wants to return to its original shape, that aids in it. So we have a lot of different connective tissues associated with the heart, but one that I want to spend a little bit of time on is something referred to as the annulus fibrosus of the heart. Now on this top picture, you see those atrial muscle fibers are attached to it. It does provide in origins or insertions of a lot of the cardiac muscle, the atrial muscle as well as the ventricular muscle. It's called the skeleton of the heart. Think about our skeleton. It provides support, so it's structural support. But also, what's even more important is it acts as a electrical insulator. And the reason why I call it as an electrical insulator is it's connective tissue, and actually would be found right here, in this area here. When this little picture here, or little dot, represents the normal pacemaker of the heart, where you have the origin of electrical activity. Well, that's going to be coming down and then spreading to different parts of the atrium and eventually going down into the ventricles. There's a very ordered way in which I want the muscle to depolarize and contract. And what happens is, as the electrical impulse, I'm going to erase this here for a second, it's going to come down through this structure here and then down and transverse the annulus fibrosus. This is the only normal pathway in which electrical activity can get from the atria to the ventricles. The reason why we have that is we're going to have a little bit of delay going on here to allow the ventricles time to finish filling before they begin to contract. We don't want them prematurely depolarizing. And so you have all this electrical activity coming around here. If this connective tissue wasn't here, the muscle up here at the top of the ventricles would start to depolarize, and we depolarize from top to bottom, and we don't want that. We want to depolarize bottom to top, because when the ventricles contract, you want that blood to be propelled up towards the opening of those valves. And so it's important to have that electrical insulator so we can have loud time for finishing up the filling. Plus, the way that this system is set up, which you're going to look at in another recording, is you're going to look at the cardiac conduction system. Is you're going to see that electrical activity is going to go from here and then down. Here is the right bundle branch. Here is the left bundle branch. It's going to come down, and then we're going to have those fibers go up this way. This is going to carry the electrical impulse down the septum, down into the muscle fibers, and so the ventricular muscle will depolarize and contract in a certain fashion. It actually, this part of the ventricles depolarizes and contracts first, then down here, and then up here. So that's the order in which we want to do that. So the annulus fibrosus is very important in acting as referred as an electrical insulator. So this is the end of the recording on the anatomy of the heart.